Listen carefully, because this moment is not accidental and your presence here is not random. This message did not stumble into your life by chance. It located you with precision, because something has already shifted in the unseen realm. Something subtle, yet irreversible. There is someone with serious authority, someone who operates beyond surface-level awareness and beyond ordinary perception, who has recently noticed you. Not because you announced yourself, not because you chased validation, not because you tried to be seen, but because two very specific qualities about you stood out in a way that could not be ignored. Your restraint and your depth, your silence and your endurance. And from the moment they recognize this, they have not been able to look away, even if you are unaware of their attention. You may not feel powerful right now. In fact, you may feel isolated, disconnected, misunderstood, lonely in a way that words struggle to capture. You may feel like you're standing on the outside of life, watching others move forward while you remain paused. But here is the truth most people never realize. Loneliness is often the final stage of divine protection before elevation. What you are experiencing is not rejection, it is containment. It is not abandonment, it is separation. It is not punishment, it is preservation. You have been pulled away from distractions, from premature exposure, from environments that would have diluted what you carry. This season is not about being seen by many, it is about being preserved for the right eyes. The isolation has refined your perception, sharpened your intuition, and strengthened your inner structure. You are being trained to stand alone so that when you are finally revealed, you will not bend, break, or seek approval. The silence around you has been intentional, creating space for clarity, discipline, and alignment. And if this message resonates with your spirit, if something within you feels recognized rather than entertained, I want you to type "I am chosen" in the comments, like this video, and subscribe, because what you are stepping into requires awareness, alignment, and confirmation. This is the threshold moment where confusion gives way to understanding, where isolation turns into authority, and where the unseen work begins to surface. Now let's dive deeper. Point 1. The moment you were noticed without announcing yourself. There is a moment that happens long before recognition appears in the physical world, and it does not announce itself with applause or confirmation. It arrives quietly, invisibly, without ceremony, at the exact point when someone with discernment, authority, or spiritual rank realizes that you are not operating like everyone else. You didn't signal your worth. You didn't advertise your potential. You didn't chase validation or attempt to control perception. You withdrew, and that withdrawal is what alerted them. Those who understand real power do not look for noise or performance. They look for containment. They look for who can carry pressure without leaking, and who can hold weight without collapsing under the need to be seen. Your silence was never emptiness. It was compression. It was energy being gathered instead of wasted. You stopped explaining yourself because you no longer required permission to exist. You stopped defending your intentions because you understood that clarity does not need witnesses to be real. That restraint is rare. Most people leak themselves constantly, emotionally, verbally, and energetically, broadcasting their insecurities in hopes of being affirmed. You didn't. You learned how to remain still while being misunderstood, and how to stay anchored while narratives formed around you that you did not rush to correct. That composure is not accidental. It is a sign of inner authority. And that is precisely when attention found you, not the loud kind, but the quiet observation of those who recognize capacity before it is visible. This is also when loneliness intensified, not because you were rejected, but because access was being reduced. When someone is about to be repositioned, unnecessary observers are removed, conversations dry up, familiar dynamics dissolve, invitations fade. You felt isolated because your field was being cleared, not because you were being abandoned. That clearing is not punishment. It is preparation. It is the narrowing of energy around you so nothing interferes with what is being formed. You are not being hidden from the world out of neglect. You are being protected from interference. What felt like distance was actually alignment. What felt like silence was refinement. And what felt like loss was the quiet removal of everything that could not go with you into the next position. Point 2. Why pressure did not break you the way it breaks others. Pressure reveals structure. That is a psychological fact, not a spiritual cliché. When stress increases, most people fracture. They become reactive, impulsive, bitter, or loud, searching for relief in expression rather than regulation. You did the opposite. You became quieter, more measured. Be more selective with your energy, your words, and your reactions. That response is not accidental. It signals internal architecture, an inner framework built to hold weight without collapsing. You were tested in ways you never asked for and never advertised. You carried emotional burdens that were invisible to everyone except you. You endured loss, confusion, delay, and misinterpretation all at once, without a clear explanation or timeline. And still, you did not abandon yourself. That was the signal. Not survival alone, but composure under strain. You learned how to breathe while everything around you felt unstable. You learned how to pause when panic would have been easier. You learned how to wait when forcing outcomes felt tempting. These are not passive traits or signs of resignation. They're advanced psychological adaptations forged in environments where instability is constant and fairness is absent. This is the mindset of someone who understands that emotional regulation is power. Someone was watching from a higher vantage point, not to judge, but to measure. And what was measured was your ability to remain internally intact when external systems failed you. You proved that you could hold responsibility without becoming reckless, pressure without becoming cruel, and silence without becoming hollow. That is why your journey felt solitary. Training of this depth cannot happen in crowds. Crowds dilute focus. Crowds reward performance, not integrity. What you were developing required isolation, repetition, and restraint. It required moments where no one clapped, no one validated, and no one intervened. You were being conditioned to move without constant reassurance, to decide without applause, and to remain steady without external control. That is structure. And now that structure exists whether anyone sees it or not. You are no longer defined by what happens to you, but by how little it moves you off-center. That is not emotional detachment. That is mastery. Point 3. The loneliness that confused you but never emptied you. Loneliness and emptiness are not the same experience, though most people collapse them into one. Emptiness feels hollow, like something vital has been taken away. Loneliness, however, feels spacious, like a room being cleared. What you felt was not loss, but space being created inside you. Old connections began to fade, not because those people were evil or wrong, but because they were no longer compatible with the version of you that was quietly forming beneath the surface. Conversations that once felt engaging began to feel shallow. Environments that once felt familiar started to feel noisy, chaotic, and misaligned. Even places filled with memories felt strangely foreign. This wasn't arrogance, superiority, or withdrawal. It was recalibration. Your nervous system started rejecting chaos the way a healthy body rejects poison. Your intuition began filtering access without you consciously deciding to do so. Fewer people could reach you because fewer people could resonate with you. That kind of loneliness is a threshold state. It appears when the inner world expands faster than the outer world can keep up. It's the gap between who you were and who you are becoming. Most people panic in that gap. They rush to fill it with distractions, noise, relationships, addictions, or constant movement. You didn't. You stayed. You learned how to stand still inside the silence without trying to escape it. You stabilized inside the space instead of collapsing into it. That is why the loneliness didn't destroy you. It refined you. People who never sit alone never hear themselves clearly. They live on borrowed opinions, borrowed emotions, and borrowed identities. You learned how to sit with your own awareness without numbing it, without outsourcing your sense of self to the crowd. You learned to hear your own thoughts, feel your own rhythms, and trust your internal signals. That alone placed you in a different category. You didn't become empty. You became spacious. And only those who can hold space within themselves can ever hold real depth, clarity, and direction in the world outside. Point 4. Why your presence became impossible to ignore. There is a subtle shift that happens when a person stops seeking and starts anchoring, and it is almost imperceptible at first, like a change in atmospheric pressure that only sensitive instruments can detect. You stopped reaching outward for affirmation, approval, or permission, and without making an announcement, your attention turned inward. You began to stabilize yourself from the inside, and paradoxically, that is what made you more visible. Presence does not announce itself or demand recognition. It bends the environment quietly, altering the emotional temperature of a room without a word being spoken. People could not explain why you felt different. You did not dominate rooms, you did not perform, and you did not attempt to impress. You simply occupied space without apology, without shrinking, without overextending. That kind of grounded stillness unsettles people who rely on control through reaction, because it gives them nothing to grab onto. Someone observing you noticed that you were no longer predictable, not because you became chaotic or unstable, but because you became self-contained. Your responses were no longer pulled out of you. They arose on your terms. Power recognizes this immediately. It senses when someone is no longer leaking emotional energy into the environment. You are no longer emotionally accessible to manipulation, no longer broadcasting your needs, wounds, or triggers. You could not be rushed into decisions. You could not be baited into explanations. Silence no longer made you uncomfortable, and pressure no longer made you fold. That is when curiosity quietly turned into attention, and attention hardened into watchfulness. People began to study you, not out of admiration alone, but out of recalibration. Your stillness forced others to confront their own restlessness. Your composure exposed their strategies. Without trying, you disrupted old dynamics simply by refusing to participate in them. You became a mirror that did not react, and mirrors are threatening to those who survive by projection. What they were sensing was not arrogance or detachment, but sovereignty. You were no longer moving toward them energetically. You were rooted in yourself. And when a person becomes anchored, the world adjusts around them, because true gravity does not chase. It holds. Point 5. The protection phase you misunderstood as delay. Protection often feels like stagnation to those who don't understand timing, and in this season, You were tested by that misunderstanding at every level. You wanted movement, confirmation, visible progress, and something to prove that the path was still active. Yet instead, you were slowed in ways that felt almost intentional. Doors didn't open when expected. Conversations stalled. Opportunities hovered and then dissolved. Momentum paused just long enough to make you question yourself. But this was not blockage, and it was not punishment. This was sequencing. You were being kept out of environments that would have demanded versions of you that no longer existed. Places where you would have had to shrink, perform, or betray your internal knowing just to belong. Had you advanced too early, you would have paid for access with integrity, and the cost would have followed you far longer than the delay ever could. The pause preserved your alignment when speed would have corrupted it. In the stillness, something deeper began to recalibrate. Your discernment sharpened without announcement. You started noticing what others missed: energy shifts in rooms, the weight behind certain silences, the intention hiding inside casual words, and the patterns beneath people's behavior that repeat long before outcomes do. You saw who spoke to understand and who spoke to control. You felt when something was off before it could explain itself. This level of perception cannot survive noise. That is why life became quieter around you. Fewer distractions, fewer voices, fewer false urgencies. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was refinement. You were being trained to read reality without being told what to see. Protection rarely feels comforting in the moment because it removes stimulation before it offers clarity. It slows the outer world so the inner world can catch up. What felt like isolation was actually insulation. What felt like delay was recalibration. You were not being hidden because you were unworthy, but because exposure at the wrong time would have distorted what you were becoming. Protection is not always gentle, but it is precise. It does not ask for your opinion, and it does not explain itself while it is working. It simply positions you where compromise is unnecessary and awareness becomes your default. When movement returns, it will not require force, justification, or self-betrayal. It will feel clean, inevitable, and unmistakably aligned because the pause did its job. Point 6. The internal shift that signals the phase is ending. Recently, something changed, not with fireworks or announcements, but in the quiet places where real shifts always occur. It happened internally first. Your reactions slowed even more, not because you became passive, but because you no longer felt compelled to respond to everything that brushed against you. Your tolerance for confusion dropped. Chaos no longer entertained you, and mixed signals no longer felt worth decoding. You noticed a reduced urgency to explain yourself, to justify your intentions, to correct misunderstandings that once drained your energy. This is not withdrawal. This is integration. When protection phases end, they do not end with noise, confrontation, or dramatic closure. They end with clarity. You are no longer bracing for impact or anticipating threat. You are standing. Standing in your own nervous system, standing in your own rhythm, standing without the subtle tension that once lived in your chest. This is the moment when visibility returns, but on entirely different terms. You are not re-entering the world to be seen for validation. You are emerging as someone who knows exactly when to speak, when to move, and when silence carries more authority than words ever could. Your presence feels heavier now, not aggressive, just grounded. The attention you receive feels different because it is earned, not demanded. People sense coherence in you. There is alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you do, and that alignment quietly commands respect. You no longer rush to fill space. You allow space to respond to you. This is the subtle power of someone who has completed an internal cycle. You are no longer reacting from old patterns or survival reflexes. You are responding from awareness. The world notices this shift before it understands it. Doors open without explanation. Conversations change tone. Eyes linger a moment longer. Not because you ask to be noticed, but because you no longer need to be. This is the calm after integration, where your energy no longer leaks outward, but settles inward, dense and intentional. You are visible again, but not exposed. Seen, but not accessible to everything. You have learned that clarity is louder than defense, stillness is stronger than urgency, and self-trust is the final form of protection. Point 7. What this position means going forward. You are not here to chase recognition. You are here to carry stability into unstable spaces, and that kind of presence cannot be rushed or borrowed. It requires depth earned through silence, solitude chosen rather than forced, and refinement shaped by pressure. The loneliness you endured was never a punishment, and it was never meant to follow you forever. It was a training ground designed to teach you how to stand without leaning, how to breathe without seeking permission, and how to exist without outsourcing your worth. Every quiet season strengthened your nervous system, teaching it calm instead of reaction and clarity instead of urgency. From this point forward, connections will no longer feel loud or draining. They will align naturally with your inner rhythm, meeting you where you are, rather than pulling you apart. Opportunities will arrive that do not demand self-betrayal, explanations, or performance, only presence. And those who noticed you during your quiet phase will finally understand what was really happening. You were never hidden because you were weak, overlooked, or unready. You were hidden because you were being fortified, reinforced from the inside, and prepared to hold more without breaking. The protection around you did not end because danger vanished. It ended because you became capable, grounded and strong enough to move forward without losing yourself.